Across decades, the image of the German Wehrmacht officer from World War II has persisted in global consciousness. It evokes a complex tapestry of historical events, strategic decisions, and individual fates. This uniform, often seen in meticulous detail, represents not just a soldier, but a figure at the heart of a vast military machine, operating within unprecedented global conflict. Historians often analyze this figure not in isolation, but as a product of extensive training, specific doctrines, and the immense pressures of total war. Our exploration seeks to understand the context of their existence, drawing from historical accounts and documented facts, presenting a neutral examination of their world. Following the devastation of World War I, the Treaty of Versailles profoundly reshaped Germany's military landscape. Imposed limitations on army size and weaponry were intended to prevent future aggression, yet they inadvertently fostered a highly professional, albeit small, Reichswehr. This core group, restricted to just 100,000 men, preserved much of the traditional Prussian military ethos. Observers suggest that these constraints paradoxically led to an emphasis on innovation in training and doctrine, a focus on quality over quantity, laying foundational groundwork for future expansion. This period is crucial for understanding the genesis of the Wehrmacht's officer corps. With the rise of the Nazi Party in the 1930s, the military underwent a significant transformation. The traditional, apolitical Reichswehr was gradually integrated into the National Socialist state, becoming the Wehrmacht. While the officer corps largely retained its professional pride and hierarchy, new ideological elements were introduced, particularly through the SS and political education. Sources indicate that this period saw a delicate balance between loyalty to the state and adherence to military professionalism. The process was complex, with varying degrees of acceptance and resistance among officers, reflecting the broader societal shifts occurring within Germany. Becoming an officer in the Wehrmacht was a rigorous process, designed to cultivate leadership, discipline, and tactical acumen. Aspiring candidates typically came from military academies or through promotion from the ranks, undergoing extensive theoretical and practical training. Historical records describe an emphasis on small unit tactics, combined arms coordination, and rapid decision-making, principles central to the concept of blitzkrieg. This training forged officers capable of independent thought and initiative, qualities deemed essential for modern warfare. The process instilled a strong sense of comradeship and duty, shaping a distinctive officer culture. The Wehrmacht officer's uniform was more than mere clothing, it was a potent symbol of authority, discipline, and national identity. Each element, from the distinct peak cap to the collar tabs and shoulder boards, conveyed rank and branch of service. Contemporary accounts note the emphasis on neatness and precision, reflecting the military's self-image. This visual presentation was meticulously maintained, even in the field, serving as a constant reinforcement of the hierarchical structure and the officer's role as a leader. It projected an image of capability and professionalism, both to subordinates and the outside world. In the interwar period, German military thinkers, constrained by the Treaty of Versailles, developed new strategic and tactical doctrines. Rather than engaging in mass production, they focused on theoretical innovation. This intellectual environment fostered ideas like blitzkrieg, or lightning war, emphasizing speed, surprise, and coordinated combined arms operations. Key tenets included rapid mechanized thrusts, close air support, and bypassing enemy strongpoints. Military historians attribute the early successes of the Wehrmacht to the effective implementation of these doctrines, contrasting with the static warfare of World War I. This intellectual preparation was fundamental. The invasion of Poland in September 1939 marked the first large-scale application of the Wehrmacht's new doctrines. German officers, leading panzer divisions and motorized infantry, executed coordinated attacks with unprecedented speed and effectiveness. The campaign demonstrated the devastating power of combined arms, overwhelming Polish defenses in weeks. Historical accounts highlight the logistical challenges overcome and the tactical flexibility displayed by officers on the ground. This initial success validated the extensive pre-war training and strategic planning, bolstering confidence within the officer corps regarding their new methods of warfare. Less than a year later, the Wehrmacht turned its attention west, executing a campaign against France and the Low Countries that shocked the world. In May 1940, German forces, led by highly mobile units, bypassed the Maginot Line and encircled Allied armies at Dunkirk. The speed of the advance and the collapse of French resistance demonstrated the profound impact of Germany's modern warfare tactics. For German officers, this was a period of intense operational demand, requiring continuous adaptation and bold decision-making. The victory in France cemented the reputation of the Wehrmacht as a formidable military force. The role of a German WW2 officer carried immense responsibility, particularly at company and battalion levels where direct combat leadership was paramount. Officers were expected to lead by example, often at the front, making critical decisions under fire that could determine the fate of their men. Documents suggest they were responsible not only for tactical execution but also for the morale and welfare of their troops, a burden intensified by the brutality of the conflict. This leadership extended to planning, reconnaissance, and maintaining unit cohesion amidst chaos, demanding a complex blend of skills and resilience. Beyond the strategic maps and grand pronouncements, the daily life of an officer in the field was often one of hardship and improvisation. Accommodation ranged from temporary billets in captured towns to dugouts on the front lines. Rations, while generally adequate in the early war, became increasingly scarce as the conflict progressed. Correspondence and diaries reveal a mix of professional duty, personal reflection, and the constant threat of combat. Maintaining discipline and routine amidst challenging conditions was a key function of an officer, setting an example for their men and fostering a sense of order in disorder. Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, marked a dramatic escalation and a fundamental shift in the war. German officers were now tasked with commanding forces across vast distances, contending with extreme environmental conditions, and facing an enemy whose resilience was often underestimated. The initial advances were swift, but the sheer scale of the Eastern Front soon exposed logistical vulnerabilities. This campaign tested the Wehrmacht's officer corps unlike any prior engagement, demanding unprecedented levels of endurance and adaptability, and fundamentally altering the nature of the conflict. The onset of the Russian winter of 1941-42 brought the Wehrmacht's advance to a grinding halt, revealing critical oversights in planning. German officers, ill-equipped for the extreme cold, faced catastrophic challenges: frostbite, mechanical failures in vehicles, and an inability to resupply their frontline troops effectively. Eyewitness accounts and historical reports detail the immense suffering and the desperate measures taken to maintain combat effectiveness. This period is often cited as a turning point, not in terms of territorial gains, but in the psychological and material attrition inflicted upon the German army and its leadership. On the Eastern Front, the strain on German officers was immense. They faced not only the logistical and environmental challenges but also a brutal, ideological war with no quarter given. The concept of Kommissar order, for example, compelled officers to disregard international law regarding political commissars, further intensifying the conflict. This placed immense moral and psychological pressure on commanders, with historians noting the internal conflicts many faced. The sheer brutality of the fighting, often extending to civilian populations, created a unique and harrowing command environment, reflected in post-war testimonies and documents. The vast distances and poor infrastructure of the Eastern Front severely tested the Wehrmacht's logistical capabilities. Fuel, ammunition, and food had to be transported over thousands of kilometers, often on unpaved roads and through harsh weather. German officers, particularly those in quartermaster and supply roles, faced an impossible task. Records show that maintaining operational readiness hinged on a fragile network of rail and road transport, constantly vulnerable to partisan attacks and mechanical breakdowns. This logistical strain was a persistent concern, directly impacting strategic decisions and frontline effectiveness. While the bulk of German forces fought in the east, a significant, albeit smaller, contingent of Wehrmacht officers found themselves in a vastly different theater, the deserts of North Africa. The Afrika Korps, led by figures like Erwin Rommel, faced the British and Commonwealth forces in a war of maneuver across barren landscapes. Officers here had to adapt to extreme heat, sandstorms, and unique logistical challenges, including water scarcity. This was a war of tanks and daring raids, demanding different tactical considerations and a specialized approach to command, a stark contrast to the frozen plains of Russia. The North African campaign became a strategic seesaw, with Allied and Axis forces trading blows across the desert. German officers, despite often being outnumbered and outsupplied, gained a reputation for tactical ingenuity, exemplified by early successes against British forces. However, as Allied strength grew and supply lines stretched, the tide began to turn. The campaign illustrated the critical role of logistics and industrial capacity in modern warfare, highlighting how even brilliant tactical leadership could be overcome by superior material resources. This theater provided unique lessons for the Wehrmacht. As the war progressed, particularly from 1943 onwards, Allied air superiority became an increasingly dominant factor on all fronts. German officers frequently recounted the challenge of operating under constant aerial threat, which hampered troop movements, disrupted supply lines, and demoralized soldiers. The Luftwaffe, once formidable, found itself outmatched. This forced commanders to adapt tactics, emphasizing camouflage, dispersion, and night operations. The shift in air power significantly altered the battlefield, placing an additional burden on ground officers to mitigate the devastating effects of Allied bombing and strafing runs. The Battle of Stalingrad, lasting from August 1942 to February 1943, stands as a brutal testament to the war's turning point on the Eastern Front. German officers, accustomed to rapid maneuvers, found themselves embroiled in a savage urban struggle, house to house and street by street. The encirclement of the German Sixth Army under Field Marshal Paulus led to a devastating defeat. Historians often point to Stalingrad as the moment when the strategic initiative irrevocably shifted to the Soviets. For the German officer corps, it represented not just a tactical disaster, but a profound psychological blow, signaling the beginning of the long retreat. The Battle of Kursk in July 1943 represented Germany's last major strategic offensive on the Eastern Front. It was a massive clash of armor, intended to regain the initiative lost at Stalingrad. Despite fielding powerful new tanks like the Tiger, German officers were unable to break through the deeply entrenched Soviet defenses. The battle, characterized by colossal tank engagements, resulted in heavy German losses in men and material, confirming their inability to mount sustained large-scale offensives. Sources indicate that Kursk cemented the Wehrmacht's defensive posture for the remainder of the war in the East. From 1943 onwards, the focus for many German officers shifted from offensive operations to the defense of Fortress Europe. This involved constructing elaborate fortifications along the Atlantic Wall and preparing for an anticipated Allied invasion. Commanders faced the challenge of defending vast coastal areas with dwindling resources and increasingly demoralized troops. The strategic dilemma was immense: where would the Allies strike, and how could they be repelled? Historical records demonstrate the desperate efforts to fortify positions and train reserves, all while facing constant Allied reconnaissance and bombing raids. D-Day, the Allied landings in Normandy on June 6, 1944, represented the beginning of the end for German control in Western Europe. German officers, caught off guard by the scale and location of the invasion, faced overwhelming Allied air and naval superiority. Initial responses were disjointed due to command confusion and Hitler's refusal to release reserves. The Battle for Normandy was a brutal, drawn-out affair, forcing German commanders to fight defensively against a numerically superior and well-supplied enemy. The inability to dislodge the beachhead sealed the fate of the Western Front. Amidst the escalating pressures of the war, a small but significant number of German officers became involved in resistance movements against Hitler's regime. The most notable example was the July 20 plot of 1944, an attempt by officers like Claus von Stauffenberg to assassinate Hitler and overthrow the Nazi government. This act of defiance stemmed from a combination of moral opposition to Nazi atrocities and a realization that the war was irrevocably lost. The plot's failure led to brutal purges within the Wehrmacht, yet it underscores the internal divisions and moral quandaries faced by some within the officer corps. As Allied forces advanced on Germany's western border in late 1944, Hitler launched a desperate counteroffensive known as the Battle of the Bulge. German officers were tasked with leading a final, audacious thrust through the Ardennes forest, aiming to split the Allied lines. Despite initial surprise and local successes, the offensive ultimately failed due to fuel shortages, logistical overstretch, and overwhelming Allied air superiority. This costly gamble further depleted Germany's remaining reserves, hastening the inevitable collapse. For the officers involved, it was a brutal, cold winter of dwindling hope. With fronts collapsing in both east and west, German officers found themselves orchestrating a fighting retreat back to the Reich's borders. This period was characterized by desperate defensive stands, often by ill-equipped and exhausted troops, against overwhelming odds. The strategic objective shifted from victory to delaying the inevitable, allowing for civilian evacuations and attempts to secure more favorable surrender terms. The logistical and command challenges of coordinating such a vast retreat under constant pressure were immense, marking a stark contrast to the early war's rapid advances. As Allied and Soviet forces converged on Berlin in April 1945, the Wehrmacht, particularly its officer corps, faced the final, tragic days of the war. Command structures disintegrated, and orders often went unheeded or were impossible to execute. Many officers, facing capture, risked their lives attempting to lead their men to the Western Allies rather than falling into Soviet hands. The end was characterized by chaos, desperation, and the immense human cost of total war. Their final directives often involved organizing local defenses, or, for some, the heartbreaking decision to surrender. Following Germany's unconditional surrender, many German officers faced profound questions of accountability for their actions during the war. The Nuremberg trials, and subsequent denazification processes, sought to address war crimes and the role of the military in the regime's atrocities. While some officers were tried and convicted, others were interned and eventually released. The process of confronting the past was complex, with varying degrees of responsibility assigned. This period initiated a long and difficult national reckoning with the Wehrmacht's involvement in the crimes of the Third Reich. The legacy of the German WW2 officer has been subject to continuous historical re-evaluation. Early post-war narratives sometimes attempted to separate the professional Wehrmacht from the criminal SS. However, subsequent scholarship, drawing on extensive archival research, has demonstrated the Wehrmacht's pervasive involvement in the regime's ideological warfare and atrocities, particularly on the Eastern Front. This ongoing critical examination ensures a more nuanced and accurate understanding of their role, acknowledging both professional military aspects and the ethical compromises made within a genocidal regime. Beyond uniforms and doctrines, the story of the German WW2 officer is fundamentally a human one. It encompasses individuals grappling with duty, loyalty, fear, and the moral ambiguities of war. Diaries, letters, and memoirs offer glimpses into their personal thoughts and experiences, revealing a spectrum of responses to an unprecedented global conflict. Understanding their choices and circumstances, within the broader historical context, is essential for a complete picture. This perspective moves beyond a monolithic image, acknowledging the individual lives that comprised a powerful military force. The study of the German WW2 officer, like any deep dive into military history, offers profound lessons for contemporary understanding. It highlights the dangers of unchecked power, the complexities of professional ethics in wartime, and the devastating consequences of ideological conflict. By examining the decisions made, the systems created, and the human experiences endured, we gain insight into the broader forces that shape history. This investigative approach allows us to learn from the past, fostering a more informed perspective on leadership, conflict, and societal responsibility. The Wehrmacht's officer corps often exhibited a distinct approach to military command, balancing strategic objectives with tactical autonomy. German military doctrine traditionally emphasized Auftragstaktik, or mission-type tactics, allowing subordinate officers significant freedom in execution, provided they met the overall objective. This fostered initiative and adaptability on the battlefield. However, some historians argue that an overemphasis on tactical brilliance sometimes overshadowed strategic realities, particularly as the war progressed and political interference increased. This comparison between strategic oversight and tactical freedom remains a point of academic discussion. Despite its ultimate defeat and the heinous context of the regime it served, the operational and organizational innovations of the Wehrmacht had a lasting impact on global military thought. Concepts like combined arms, deep penetration tactics, and decentralized command were studied and adapted by post-war armies around the world. Military academies in various nations incorporated analyses of German campaigns into their curricula. However, this study always came with the crucial caveat of divorcing tactical lessons from the abhorrent political and moral framework within which they were developed, a vital distinction for ethical military education. While senior officers directed grand strategy, the burden of direct combat leadership often fell to junior officers, lieutenants, and captains. These young men were at the sharp end, responsible for implementing orders, inspiring their troops, and adapting to rapidly changing battlefield conditions. Their experiences, captured in personal accounts, reveal the intense pressure, fear, and heroism inherent in their positions. They were the crucial link between high command and the common soldier, often paying the highest price. Their actions directly influenced the success or failure of local engagements. Beyond frontline combat, a significant portion of the German officer corps specialized in engineering, logistics, and technical fields. These officers were crucial for constructing fortifications, bridging rivers, maintaining complex weaponry, and developing new technologies. Their expertise contributed to the Wehrmacht's operational capabilities, from the rapid construction of airfields during the Blitzkrieg to the development of advanced tanks and rockets. This technical arm of the officer corps often worked behind the scenes, yet their contributions were indispensable for sustaining the war effort and overcoming formidable technical challenges. For German officers, precise maps and timely intelligence were paramount for effective command. Staff officers spent countless hours analyzing topographical data, enemy dispositions, and aerial reconnaissance reports to formulate battle plans. The quality of German cartography and intelligence gathering was often high, providing commanders with detailed insights into the battlefield. However, as the war progressed, intelligence became less reliable, and the ability to act on it diminished due to Allied air superiority and compromised communication networks. The reliance on accurate information was constant, but its availability fluctuated dramatically. Effective communication was the lifeblood of German military operations, enabling rapid command and control. Officers utilized a range of methods, from field telephones and radio sets to motorcycle messengers and couriers. The Wehrmacht placed significant emphasis on secure and efficient communication, developing advanced encryption for sensitive orders. However, these networks were vulnerable to disruption, particularly from Allied electronic warfare and partisan activity. Maintaining communication links under combat conditions was a constant challenge, critical for coordinating dispersed units and responding to fluid situations, particularly in the vastness of the Eastern Front. While German officers were primarily concerned with military operations, they also operated within a system heavily reliant on psychological warfare and propaganda. The Nazi regime's propaganda machine cultivated an image of the Wehrmacht as invincible and morally upright, both for internal consumption and external intimidation. Officers were often involved in disseminating this narrative among their troops, reinforcing morale and justifying the regime's objectives. However, as the war turned, the disconnect between propaganda and reality created growing disillusionment within the ranks, a challenge for even the most dedicated commanders. The conflict on the Eastern Front was not merely a territorial struggle but an ideological war of annihilation. German officers, from generals to company commanders, were frequently exposed to, and sometimes complicit in, the regime's brutal racial policies. Orders like the Commissar Order or directives concerning the treatment of partisans blurred the lines between combat and criminality. This distinct nature of the Eastern Front profoundly shaped the experiences and actions of officers serving there, imposing unique moral and ethical challenges that are still debated and investigated by historians today. The high attrition rates of World War II meant that German officers faced significant risks, often leading from the front. Casualty figures reflect this exposure, with many officers killed, wounded, or captured throughout the conflict. The loss of experienced leadership posed a constant challenge, forcing rapid promotions and a reliance on younger, less seasoned commanders. This constant churn of leadership affected unit cohesion and operational effectiveness, particularly in the later stages of the war. Their personal sacrifices were immense, a stark reminder of the brutal realities of their profession. Behind the infantry and tanks, German artillery officers played a critical role in providing essential fire support, suppressing enemy positions, and breaking through defenses. Their precise calculations and coordinated barrages were vital to the Blitzkrieg's success and defensive operations alike. Similarly, logistics, medical, and administrative officers were indispensable, ensuring the flow of supplies, care for the wounded, and overall operational efficiency. These support roles, often less visible than frontline combat, were foundational to the Wehrmacht's ability to wage war, highlighting the intricate division of labor within the officer corps. For many German officers, the war did not end with surrender but continued in prisoner of war camps, often for years after 1945. Conditions varied widely depending on the captor, Allied or Soviet, with Eastern Front POWs facing particularly harsh conditions and high mortality rates. In Western camps, officers often maintained internal hierarchies and engaged in various activities, from education to escape attempts. Their experiences as POWs offer another lens through which to view the end of the war and the beginning of a new era, marked by physical and psychological recovery and often, political re-education. In the immediate aftermath of World War II, Germany lay in ruins, and many former Wehrmacht officers found themselves navigating a shattered society. Some faced trials, others rehabilitation, and many simply sought to rebuild their lives. Their military skills, once applied to warfare, were sometimes repurposed for civilian reconstruction efforts. The creation of the Bundeswehr in the 1950s saw some former officers integrated into the new democratic German army, but under strict democratic oversight and with a fundamentally different ethos. This period marked a critical transition from military defeat to national reconstruction. Beyond historical analysis, the image of the German WW2 officer has permeated popular culture, from film and television to literature and games. This portrayal is often stylized, sometimes romanticized, and frequently diverges from historical realities. These depictions influence public perception, contributing to both enduring fascination and historical misconceptions. Our aim is to provide a fact-based foundation that allows viewers to engage with these cultural representations more critically, understanding the historical layers beneath the cinematic or fictionalized image. It is a figure that continues to captivate and challenge understanding. As this historical exploration draws to a close, we hope this narrative, presented with a restrained and factual approach, has offered a unique backdrop for your study or work. The intricate details of military organization, strategic challenges, and the human element within conflict can provide a stimulating environment for focused thought. The enduring image of the German WW2 officer, stripped of glorification or vilification, serves as a reminder of a pivotal period in history. May this context foster an environment conducive to deep work, allowing the historical narrative to unfold as a quiet, thought-provoking presence.